Some nights in Korea, the country feels like a held breath. The crosswalk melody stops early. The apartment courtyards fall quiet too quickly. The neon softens from shout to whisper. And in the spaces where the city's systems are supposed to keep us safe, the clinics, the schools, the district offices, something begins to listen back. If you like stories like these, hit subscribe so the next one finds you before the lights flicker for real. Now, settle in. Do not pause. Do not look over your shoulder. Listen and keep your name to yourself. They sent me to the memory clinic in Seongbuk because I had the voice for nights. Calm, quiet, the kind people trusted to explain things softly. After the summer, when I forgot my grandmother on a bench outside the pharmacy, only for 5 minutes, but long enough to scar my nerves, I wanted a job that felt like a form of penance. So I took the evening shift as a receptionist on the quiet floor. That's not its real name, of course. The sign reads, Cognitive Care Ward B, 4th floor, end of the corridor past the vending machine that steals bills after 10. But everyone calls it the quiet floor because sound behaves differently there. Even daylight footsteps feel padded. The air conditioner hums like it remembers things. And when people forget, this is where they're measured back into themselves. My shift began at 7 o'clock. I'd clock in, pour barley tea into a paper cup, and count the slippers by the ward door. If the number changed while my back was turned, I learned not to mention it. The head nurse didn't like superstition. Here we keep people located, she told me, not scared. On the quiet floor, every item carried a name: toothbrush, cardigan, remote, cup. Because names were supposed to anchor people. That's the idea. But the first thing I learned was that names sometimes call things you don't mean to summon. The hum started around 8:30. Not from lights or machines, but from behind closed doors. A soft, almost human vibration, like someone remembering how to say a syllable. I thought it was a patient humming, until one woman froze mid-step outside room 406. Her head tilted as if she'd just heard her name whispered correctly for the first time. That room had been empty since spring. Its whiteboard was blank except for the faint outline of a name long wiped away. The clinic used keycards. Tap once to open, twice to lock. At 10:17, my monitor showed room 406, flickering between online and offline, as if someone was pressing a badge against the reader but not quite committing. I looked down the hall. Nothing but still air and soft fluorescent buzz. I told myself it was a glitch, but the hum grew louder after that, settling into the bones of the floor. There's a rule on the quiet floor. Never say your full name in an empty corridor. The nurses didn't write it down. They just didn't do it. I forgot once, and the head nurse raised a single finger like a warning. We label everything, she said, except ourselves. But that night, out of habit, I wrote my first name on the back of my badge anyway. A small act of defiance. Something to remind myself who I was surrounded by all that forgetting. When the night doctor texted he'd be late, I dimmed the lights, checked every room, and stood by the desk listening to the faint rattle of rain outside. The whiteboard beside me, the one where we note schedules, showed my handwriting clearly. 4 and 4. White noise therapy. Then, underneath, a second line appeared. Lighter, fainter. Please do not call me by that name. I rubbed it off with my sleeve, but the stain seemed to sink deeper, like the words wanted to stay. The cool light in room 404 blinked at 11:34. The patient sat awake, staring at the corner where the wall met the ceiling. Is something wrong? I asked. He said, My mother keeps telling me my name isn't mine. I pressed the white noise button. The hum filled the room, thick as cotton. When I stepped back into the corridor, the motion light outside 406 turned on by itself. The hum deepened, almost welcoming. I didn't look at the door. I knew better than to meet what was already meeting me. The doctor arrived at 102. Together we checked the ward. When he tried 406, his card light turned green. "You assigned this room?" he asked. I said no, but he opened it anyway. The bed was made, the pillow perfect. On the tray sat a single paper cup and a packet of almonds. My stomach tightened. The same brand the vending machine had dropped earlier when I hadn't selected anything. The doctor didn't notice. "Someone still likes midnight snacks," he joked. I didn't answer. Back at the desk, I reviewed the night footage. The cameras showed me walking past the corridor with my tea at 9:21, and then the feed froze. When it resumed, the timestamp skipped forward a full hour. The doctor said not to trust old screens, and we both laughed too hard. But later, when he left for rounds, I stayed by the monitor. That's when I heard it. A voice faint but close, moving between the static hiss and the white noise hum, whispering my name once, then again, only slightly wrong the second time, as if testing it for weight. I didn't move. I just said quietly, "That name's borrowed. You can have it back." The air behind me changed. Not cold, not cinematic, just a subtle release, like someone exhaling after holding their breath too long. Then silence. When I turned, the hallway light outside 406 had turned off. Weeks later, when people asked why I quit, I told them it was the hours. That was true in part. But what I never told anyone was that sometimes, when I'm half asleep, I still hear a faint writing sound. Chalk against board, deliberate, slow. Not my name, not anyone's. Just the motion of a hand trying to remember how to write something it no longer needs to say. And on those nights, I leave my badge turned inward against my chest, because on the quiet floor, the only way to keep what's yours is not to offer it aloud. They said the lamps at the old harbour were never meant to go out. Each one was shaped like a small bronze bowl, hung on a crooked metal spine along the breakwater, lit every evening by hand. Before the modernization project, that had been the watchman's job. To walk from one end of the sea wall to the other with a long bamboo pole tipped with a soaked wick, dipping it into each lamp like a priest blessing relics. When the city installed electric lighting, the old lamps were left in place, unpowered, their soot and salt clinging like memories. Only one still burned, the one nearest the decommissioned lighthouse, where the sea broke hardest. No one knew who kept it lit, only that it was never dark. The story begins with a man named Yunho, who returned to his hometown after 20 years away. He had been a technician in Busan. Cables, signals, things that kept ships from colliding, until the accident that left him with a tremor in his left hand. The sea was cheaper than therapy, he thought. His father had been the last official harbour watchman, the man who lit the lamps and reported the weather by radio to the mainland before the channels went silent. Yuno hadn't been back since the funeral, but after the hospital discharged him at 9:43. On a grey Tuesday, he found himself boarding the intercity bus that wound north along the coast. The village looked smaller than he remembered. The convenience store had shuttered, replaced by a glass workshop that never seemed open. The air carried the metallic taste of kelp and diesel. His father's house still stood near the breakwater, its blue roof rusted to green. Inside, the clocks were all stopped, each frozen at different times, the kitchen at 7:20, the hallway at 8:58, his father's bedroom at 11:06. When he wound one out of habit, it ticked once and fell silent, as if refusing to restart an argument. That night, he walked down to the pier, following the wind that smelled of storm and old wood. The electric lamps were dark, the wires eaten by salt years ago. Only the last bronze lamp burned faintly against the black sea. Its flame leaned sideways, orange and stubborn. He stood watching it sway. The tide hissed against the stones, whispering like voices trapped under the waves. When the wind shifted, he heard what might have been a man calling faintly from far offshore. He told himself it was only the buoys moaning in the current. At 10:45, the tide had risen high enough to touch the lower rocks of the wall. The bronze lamp sputtered once, then steadied. He felt the same mixture of relief and unease he used to feel watching his father's nightly rounds. Every lamp must be lit before midnight, his father used to say. If one goes dark before its turn, something from the water will try to take the flame back. As a boy, he'd thought that meant superstition, fishermen guarding against boredom. But now, standing there with the night pressing close, he wondered whether the rule had been a bargain rather than a warning. The following morning, he asked the grocer who tended the small shop by the bus stop, who kept the lamp burning. The woman shook her head. "It lights itself now," she said. "Nobody's gone near it since your father died." He laughed, but she didn't. "Don't go touching it," she added, glancing toward the water. "Light that stays without tending doesn't belong to us." He tried to ignore her words, but that evening, as he lay on his father's futon with the window cracked open, he saw the reflection of that distant flame bouncing across the ceiling like a heartbeat. The sound of the sea grew louder with the wind. Somewhere below, something metallic scraped. A chain dragged against stone. Then came 3 short strikes, like a hammer against a pipe. He got up, pulled on his coat, and stepped outside. The air was thick with mist. Down by the breakwater, the lamps stood like bent soldiers. The last one burned steady, too steady. The wind should have blown it sideways, but the flame stood upright as if protected by glass. He approached slowly, gravel crunching under his boots. The closer he came, the stronger the air smelled of kerosene. His father's matches were still in his pocket from the old jacket he wore. Out of habit, he struck one. The sudden flare of sulfur lit his fingers. The bronze lamp's flame answered, flared higher for an instant, then shrank, mirroring his movement. He remembered something his father used to say when teaching him how to light them. The flame listens if you listen back. He leaned closer, the wind snapping against his ears. Beneath the hiss of the sea, he heard a faint whisper, a voice calling not to him but through him, as if using his breath as a wire. He dropped the match and stumbled back. The voice faded, replaced by the low moan of the tide dragging pebbles. The next day, he climbed the steps to the old lighthouse, hoping to find the source of the illusion. Maybe a cracked pipe, a gas leak, anything logical. The keeper's door was rusted shut, but the window had been left ajar. Inside, the control room smelled of brine and wax. On the desk sat a logbook with pages damp from humidity. The entries stopped 3 years ago. The final line read, "Lamp 1 still lit, won't go out, says it's not time yet." He ran his hand over the ink, already blurred to grey. Under the line, indentations showed faintly from the pressure of a pen pressing too hard. He shaded them with pencil. More words appeared. "It needs a name to rest." That night the weather changed. Rain came down in sheets, the kind that erases distance. He sat inside listening to the storm batter the roof. When thunder rolled, he thought he heard footsteps outside on the pier, pacing between lamps. He looked through the window. The sea wall shimmered with water, but the last lamp still burned, its flame a small, unwavering bead of gold. He should have felt comforted. Instead, he felt watched. At 12:26, the power flickered inside the house even though the grid had been cut from the village months ago. The ceiling bulb blinked once, twice, then steadied, glowing with a faint orange hue, the same color as the harbor flame. He stepped outside into the rain. Every window along the row of empty houses glowed with that same dull orange light, like reflections from a fire no one had started. He followed the path down to the pier, the rain soaking through his jacket. The flame in the lamp rose taller, stretching against the wind, forming the rough outline of a person before collapsing back into itself. He reached the edge of the sea wall and saw what he thought was someone kneeling by the lamp, a man in a soaked uniform coat, striking the air with a bamboo pole as if lighting invisible lamps. When the lightning flashed, the figure vanished. Only the pole remained, leaning against the railing, its wick blackened at the end. He picked it up, trembling. The metal clasp near the top bore his father's initials carved shallowly, half erased by corrosion. He carried it home and placed it by the door. The rain slowed at 2:09, tapering into mist. The horizon lightened with false dawn. He told himself he'd dreamed the figure, that the mind invents patterns when it wants a story to end cleanly. But when he looked out again, the lamp still burned bright, defiant against the grey. He didn't sleep. When the morning finally came, the grocer found him sitting on the seawall, the pole across his knees. She told him the flame had never been so strong. "You should leave it," she said quietly. "Let the sea keep what it remembers." He nodded, but he couldn't make himself stand. He kept staring at the lamp until the sunlight drowned its color. Only then did it dim on its own. For the first time since his father's death, the bronze bowl went dark. That night, without thinking, he walked the entire line of lamps along the breakwater, touching each with the bamboo pole as his father once did. The flame in the last lamp rekindled the moment he stopped before it. It lit with a low, steady breath, no spark, no sound, as if acknowledging completion. He watched until the sea breeze bent it toward him. A warmth spread through his chest, neither fear nor peace. He realized then what the light had been waiting for. Not his father's return, but the continuation of the ritual. Someone had to make the walk, to remind the sea that the line between shore and water still existed. When the villagers awoke the next morning, they saw every lamp along the pier burning. Not electric, but real flame, small and even, their smoke tracing a line against the dawn. No one knew who lit them. Some said it was the wind, others said it was the sea remembering. The grocer said nothing, but left a thermos of barley tea by Yuno's door. Weeks later, when a crew from the mainland arrived to dismantle the pier, they found the lamps cold and clean, the soot gone as if scrubbed by rain. The only sign of anyone having been there was a single bamboo pole leaning against the last lamp, the metal clasp polished bright. The foreman touched it, frowned, and said it was still warm. People in the new harbour say that on certain nights, when the fog drifts in and the automated warning lights fail, a row of faint orange dots appears across the old breakwater, one after another, leading out to sea. They say if you follow them, you'll find a man walking just ahead, keeping the flame steady in the wind. When you call to him, he doesn't turn. but he raises a pole and touches each light in order. When he reaches the last one, he stops. The sea grows calm. The lights fade. No one has seen his face clearly. Some think it's the watchman's son. Others think the sea simply learned the gesture. But the villagers agree on one thing. The light is never malicious. It's a reminder, a duty that refused to forget itself. If you ever walk that coastline near midnight and you see a single lamp still burning while the others are dead, leave it alone. Don't try to help. Don't try to thank it. Just nod once and keep walking, because light that stays without tending doesn't belong to us. When people talk about abandoned schools in Korea, they usually mean the mountain ones. Shuttered in the 90s when the last families moved away, the classrooms left full of chalk dust and sunlight. But the one in Yeosu was different. It had closed suddenly in the middle of winter, after a fire inspection that no one could quite explain. The main gate was padlocked. The school nameplate had been stolen so often that someone finally removed it altogether, leaving only 4 holes in the concrete where the bolts had been. Yet, every month, someone kept sweeping the front steps. I first heard about the art room from a colleague at the provincial archive. We were cataloguing a batch of student yearbooks from the early 2000s, the kind with stiff smiles and glitter pen signatures that bled through the pages. One of the books had a note taped inside: "Return to red ink room after restoration." The handwriting was thin, angular, like someone carving with a brush that didn't want to bend. There was no teacher signature, no class name, only that phrase, "red ink room." When I looked up the school code, it matched the Yosu building, the one that had burned but never rebuilt. I wasn't a ghost hunter. I was a municipal clerk with a weak back and an overdeveloped sense of duty. But there was something about the phrasing that bothered me. A room doesn't need a name unless someone expects it to come back. So one weekend in March, I drove down to the coast and found the school. The front gate was still locked, but the side fence had been pushed flat by years of rain and grass. Inside, the campus felt preserved in amber. The flagpole was rusted through at the base, the cafeteria windows smeared with algae. The main building's doors hung half open, paper notices pasted everywhere, their ink long washed away. The air inside smelled faintly of varnish and smoke. My footsteps echoed down the hallway, past rooms labelled science, home economics, music. Each door had its window painted over from the inside with white correction fluid, as if the school had been embarrassed by its own reflection. When I reached the art department, the corridor turned colder. Someone had scratched a single word into the wall beside the entrance: "Keep." The art room was exactly where the floor plan said it would be. 3rd floor, southern wing, overlooking the slope where the cherry trees grew wild. The door stood open. Inside, easels were stacked like bones. The blackboard still held a list of student numbers written in red marker, faded to brown. Above the sink, brushes hung stiff as straw, and on the central table lay a book. Not a textbook or a sketchpad, but a ledger bound in canvas, the cover darkened with something that looked like dried ink. When I opened it, I found rows of student names written in careful block letters. Next to each name was a date, followed by a symbol. Sometimes a small circle, sometimes a line drawn through. The most recent entry was from 15 years ago. It read, "Class 3B exhibition, incomplete." I flipped further back and saw another line, written differently, almost violently. "Do not use red for portraits." Beneath it, someone else had scrawled in smaller letters, Then what else are we supposed to use for blood? The sound of a chair shifting made me freeze. I looked up. One of the easels had tilted slightly, its canvas facing the window. The light caught on it just right to reveal the faint outline of a face, not drawn, but soaked into the fabric, as if the pigment had bled through from the back. I stepped closer. The material was brittle, and when I touched it, a red dust puffed up like pollen. The smell that came with it wasn't paint, it was iron. I told myself it was rust, a chemical reaction, something left over from water damage. But when I turned the canvas over, there was writing on the back in thick brushstrokes. Red saves what blue forgets. The words were still wet. I felt it on my fingers. I stepped away, breathing shallowly. My phone showed the time as at 3:27. The light through the window had gone amber, the kind that makes dust look alive. Outside, the cherry trees were in bloom even though the air was too cold. For a moment, I thought I saw someone walking between them. A tall figure in a dark coat, carrying something under one arm. Then the wind shifted, and the shape dissolved into branches. I should have left then, but I kept thinking about the phrase in the ledger, "Return to Red Ink Room." If this was the room, maybe there was something left to return. I started opening the drawers under the tables. Most were empty except for broken charcoal and dried erasers. But in the last one, wrapped in newspaper, I found jars of pigment, yellow, blue, black, and one labeled only with a student's name in handwriting I recognized from the ledger. The jar was half full of red paint that hadn't dried. I twisted the lid open. The smell hit me instantly. Copper, varnish, something sweet beneath it. I don't know why, but I dipped my finger in. The color clung to my skin, darker than any red I'd seen in ink or paint, almost brown until the light touched it. Then it gleamed. The floorboards creaked behind me. I turned, expecting wind. Instead, the door was closing slowly on its own. My pulse jumped. The air in the room thickened, the light dimmed, and for the first time I noticed the faint hum that all old buildings seem to have. Except this one had rhythm, like slow breathing. The red paint on my finger pulsed in time with it. I wiped my hand on a rag, grabbed my bag, and stepped toward the door. When I reached for the knob, something stopped me. Not a sound, not a voice, but the subtle awareness that if I left now, I would always be the person who looked away first. So I turned back. There were 12 canvases on the walls. Most were blank, stretched tight, but one, near the window, showed a half-finished portrait of a girl in uniform. Her eyes were painted with such care that I felt she was looking directly at me. The red in her lips was too fresh, the paint thicker than it should be. I took a cautious step closer. The signature at the bottom right corner matched the name on the pigment jar. Something about the brushwork unsettled me. Each stroke looked deliberate yet trembling, as if the painter had been racing against time. Under the layers of color, I could see faint scratches, words carved into the primer. I leaned in, squinting, and read them out loud before I could stop myself. The portrait must remember the heat. The lights flickered once and went out. My phone screen died too. In the dark, I heard a sound like paper tearing slowly, then a whisper close enough to feel on my ear. "Don't finish her." The voice wasn't angry, it was pleading. The air around me vibrated like something large breathing through the walls. I reached blindly for my phone and pressed the side button until the screen lit faintly. The beam caught the portrait again, but now the eyes were gone, smeared to blank sockets. Red drips ran down to the floorboards. The pigment had started to move, spreading thin tendrils across the wood, seeking shape. I stumbled back, kicking over a stool. My elbow hit another canvas. It fell forward, landing face down with a dull thud. From underneath came a low sound, like a sigh escaping a closed mouth. The room smelled of iron and mold. I heard footsteps in the hall, slow, deliberate, measured. Then silence. At some point, I must have lost consciousness, because when I came to, the window was open and the air smelled clean again. Morning light washed across the desks. My phone said, at 7:13. The portrait was still there, but the face had changed. Just a faint outline of a woman's hair, no eyes, no mouth, no color. The jar of red pigment was gone. I left without closing the door. Back at the archive, I tried to convince myself it had been a panic attack or some mix of paint fumes and exhaustion. But the ledger had followed me. It sat on my desk the next morning, though I had never carried it out. A new line had been added in the same angular handwriting as before. Class 3B exhibition complete. My name had been written underneath, and beside it, a circle. A month later, a reporter from the local paper visited the archive, asking about the Yosu school fire. He said the building had finally been torn down, but workers found the third-floor art room untouched. No soot, no damage. Just 12 blank canvases nailed to the wall, one with faint traces of red still bleeding through the fabric. When they tried to remove them, the wood split. He showed me a photo on his tablet. In the image, sunlight poured through the broken window. The canvases stood in a row like open doors. On the far right, a faint figure appeared between the light and the wall. A woman's silhouette, her hand raised as if holding a brush. I don't show that picture to anyone now. Not because I think they'll be afraid, but because I don't want to explain what it feels like to see your own posture replicated exactly in a place you've never stood. Every year around March, when the cherry trees bloom too early and the coastal air smells faintly of varnish, I receive a small package in the mail. No return address, just my name written in red ink. Inside, there's always a folded scrap of canvas, unpainted, perfectly blank. I keep them in a drawer I never open. If you visit Yosu and find the new school built over the old foundation, don't take photos near the art department. Don't ask about the exhibition that never opened. Some rooms are not abandoned because people forgot them. They are abandoned because they remember too much. And if you ever find a jar of red paint without a label, leave it sealed, because red saves what blue forgets. The signal light at Sindang station turned red at 1:47 a.m, and it stayed that way for 11 minutes. I was working the overnight maintenance shift, inspecting the tracks between Sindang and Cheonggu, and when a signal stays red that long without a train passing, it means something's on the line. I radioed the control center and reported the anomaly, and they told me to proceed to the signal box and check for obstructions. I grabbed my inspection kit, flashlight, track gauge, emergency radio, and walked down the tunnel, following the maintenance path alongside the rails. The tunnel was dimly lit by service lights mounted every 30 meters, their yellow glow barely enough to see by, and the air was thick with the smell of grease and ozone. I'd been working for Seoul Metro for 6 years, ever since graduating from technical college, and I knew the Line 2 tunnels better than I knew my own apartment. Every curve, every junction, every signal box had become familiar through repetition, and I'd learned to recognize the normal sounds. The hum of electricity through the third rail, the distant rumble of trains on parallel lines, the drip of water from the ceiling. But tonight, something was different. The tunnel felt wrong, the air pressure off, as if something large had displaced it recently. I checked my watch, 1:52 a.m. The signal was still red. I reached the signal box at 1:58 and opened the access panel. The wiring inside looked normal, no burns, no loose connections. But the relay switch was cycling continuously, flipping between red and green every few seconds. I tested it manually, overriding the automatic system, and the light locked on green. I radioed the control center again, reporting the fault, and they told me to tag it for repair and continue the inspection. I marked the box with a maintenance flag, then kept walking, following the track toward Cheonggu. The tunnel curved slightly to the left, the walls narrowing, and I noticed something I'd never seen before. A service door built into the wall, metal and unmarked, with a simple keypad lock. I'd walked this section hundreds of times and never noticed it. I tried the handle, locked. I checked my maintenance manual, scrolling through the digital map on my tablet, but the door didn't appear on any schematic. I took a photo and sent it to the control center with a query. Unknown door at km 47.3, line 2 eastbound, not on system map, advise. The response came back 5 minutes later. No record of door at that location. Proceed with standard inspection. I stood there for a moment, staring at the door, then kept moving. The signal light behind me stayed green, and I told myself it was just an old maintenance access, forgotten and sealed during one of the tunnel renovations in the 90s. At 2:14, I heard the train. It wasn't on my line. Line 2 eastbound was shut down for maintenance, no trains scheduled until 5:30 a.m., but the sound was unmistakable. The rhythmic clack of wheels on rails, the whine of electric motors, the rush of displaced air. I stopped and listened, trying to pinpoint the direction. It was coming from behind me, from the direction of Sindang, and it was getting louder. I pressed myself against the tunnel wall, out of the train's path, and waited. The sound grew deafening, the air pressure dropping as the train approached. But when it should have passed me, when I should have seen the lights and felt the rush of wind, there was nothing. The tunnel was empty. The sound faded into the distance, traveling deeper into the tunnel, and then it was gone. I radioed the control center immediately. This is Inspector Ominseo, line 2 eastbound at km 47.5. I just heard a train pass my position, but there's no train on this line. Can you confirm? Static, then a voice annoyed. Inspector, there's no train on line 2 eastbound. You must be hearing echo from line 5. It runs parallel in that section. I know what line 5 sounds like, I said. This was on my line. I'm sure of it. I'm looking at the tracking system right now. No trains. Finish your inspection and report back. I stood there in the empty tunnel, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, and I knew what I'd heard. But arguing with the control center was pointless, so I kept moving. At 2:31, I reached the service platform at Cheonggu Station, a narrow concrete ledge used by maintenance crews to access the track. The platform was empty except for a single wooden bench and a trash bin overflowing with old newspapers and empty soju bottles. I climbed up, checked the signal panel, and noted the green light. Everything was functioning normally. I sat down on the bench to rest for a few minutes, my legs aching from the long walk, and that's when I saw it. A newspaper dated October 15, 1994, folded neatly on the bench beside me. I picked it up. The paper was yellowed and brittle, the ink faded, but the headline was clear. Line 2 subway accident claims 12 lives, investigation ongoing. I read the article slowly, my hands shaking. On October 15, 1994, a southbound train on Line 2 had derailed near Cheonggu Station due to a signal malfunction. The train had entered a maintenance section at full speed, colliding with a work crew on the tracks. 12 people died, 6 passengers, 6 maintenance workers. The article mentioned an ongoing investigation into the signal system, suggestions of negligence, calls for improved safety protocols. At the bottom of the page was a list of the victims' names, and I recognized one of them immediately. Oh Min-seok, age 28, track maintenance inspector. The name was almost identical to mine. Oh Min-seo, 2 syllables reversed, as if someone had written it down wrong and no one had bothered to correct it. I checked the date again. October 15, 1994, 30 years ago, almost to the day. I pulled out my phone and searched for more information, but the mobile signal was dead this deep in the tunnel, and my tablet's internet connection had timed out. I folded the newspaper carefully and put it in my inspection kit, then stood up and walked back toward the tunnel entrance. I needed to get above ground, needed to verify what I'd just read, needed to understand why this newspaper was here. At 2:47, I heard the train again. This time it was ahead of me, coming from the direction of Cheonggu, traveling the wrong way on the eastbound track. I could see the lights now, 2 white beams cutting through the darkness, and I could feel the vibration in the rails beneath my feet. I pressed against the wall again, my heart pounding, and I watched as the train approached. It was an old model. The kind Seoul Metro had retired in the early 2000s, its cars painted in the original orange and cream livery. The windows were lit from within, and I could see passengers inside, men and women in outdated clothing, sitting or standing, their faces blank and expressionless. The train passed me slowly, too slowly, as if it were struggling against some invisible resistance, and I caught a glimpse of the driver's cabin. A man sat at the controls, his uniform torn and stained, his face turned toward me. His eyes met mine for a brief second, and I saw recognition there, as if he knew who I was. The train continued past me, its brakes screaming as it slowed, and I realized it was heading toward the spot where the 1994 accident had occurred, the spot where 12 people had died. I started running, following the train, my flashlight bouncing wildly in the darkness. The train stopped exactly at km 47.3, right where the unmarked service door was built into the wall. The doors opened with a pneumatic hiss, and passengers began to step out onto the track, not onto a platform, because there was no platform here, just the dark tunnel and the narrow maintenance path. They moved stiffly, mechanically, their feet making no sound as they walked toward the service door. The door, which had been locked moments before, was now standing open, a rectangle of pale light spilling out into the tunnel. I stopped running, my breath coming in ragged gasps, and I watched as the passengers filed through the door one by one. There were 12 of them, 6 in modern clothing, 6 in maintenance uniforms like mine. The last one to exit was the driver, and as he stepped down from the cabin, he turned and looked directly at me. He raised one hand slowly, not in greeting, but in warning, and then he spoke, his voice echoing strangely in the enclosed space. "Inspector O, you're early." I took a step back, my hand instinctively reaching for my radio. "Who are you?" "I'm the one who was supposed to check the signal that night," he said. "I told them it was malfunctioning. I told them to shut down the line, but they said there was a schedule to keep, and one faulty signal wasn't worth delaying service." He gestured toward the open door. "We've been waiting for the replacement." "Replacement for what?" "For the inspector who should have been here in 1994. Oh Min Seok. He was supposed to work this shift, but he called in sick that night, sent someone else. That someone else was on the tracks when the signal failed. He looked at me with hollow, tired eyes. Names matter, schedules matter. When someone doesn't show up, someone else has to fill the space. I felt my stomach drop. I'm not Oh Min Seok. My name is Oh Min Seo. Different name, different person. Close enough, he said. The roster doesn't care about one syllable. It just needs the shift filled. The other passengers had gathered near the service door, waiting, their faces turned toward me expectantly. I could see them more clearly now in the pale light. Some with injuries barely visible beneath their clothes, dark stains that might have been blood or oil, expressions caught between confusion and resignation. One of them, a young man in a maintenance uniform, stepped forward. His name tag read, Kim Nung-ho, Track Inspector. We've been riding this line for 30 years, he said quietly. Every night, the same route. Sindang to Cheonggu and back. We can't leave until the shift is complete, until the inspection is finished, until someone signs off on the report. He held up a clipboard, its pages yellowed and brittle. You're the inspector on duty tonight. You need to complete the paperwork. I stared at the clipboard. The form on top was a standard track inspection report, the kind I filled out every shift, but this one was dated October 15, 1994. The signature line at the bottom was blank, and beneath it was printed, Inspector Oh Min Seok. My hand was shaking as I reached for it, and the moment my fingers touched the paper, I felt something shift. A pulling sensation, like I was being drawn toward the open door, toward the pale light beyond it. Don't sign it, a voice said from behind me. I spun around and saw another figure standing at the far end of the tunnel, silhouetted against the service lights. It was a woman, middle-aged, wearing a Seoul Metro supervisor's uniform. She walked toward me slowly, her footsteps echoing, and as she got closer, I could see that she was solid, real, not like the others. If you sign that report, you take their place. That's how it works. Someone has to stay on the schedule. Who are you? I asked. Supervisor Kang Mirai, she said. I was working dispatch the night of the accident. I'm the one who cleared the train even though the signal report hadn't been filed. I'm the one who told the driver to proceed. She looked at the passengers gathered by the door. I've been trying to fix it ever since. Every October, around this time, they come back. The train runs, the door opens, and they wait for someone to complete the inspection that should have prevented the accident. Then why haven't you signed it? I asked. Because it's not my name on the form, she said. It has to be an inspector. It has to be someone whose job was to check the signal. That's the rule. I looked down at the clipboard in my hands. The signature line seemed to pulse slightly, the blank space drawing my eye like a void that needed to be filled. I thought about the newspaper article, about Oh Min Seok calling in sick, about the replacement inspector who had died on these tracks 30 years ago. I thought about the signal light that had stayed red for 11 minutes tonight, as if the system itself were trying to warn me. And I thought about my own name, Oh Min Seo, close enough to Oh Min Seok that the schedule, the roster, the system might not know the difference. If I don't sign it, I said, what happens to them? Supervisor Kang shook her head. They keep riding forever, until someone closes the loop. And if I do sign it, then you become part of the schedule. You finish the inspection they never completed, and you take their place on the train. She paused, her voice softening. But they go free. The loop breaks. The train stops running. I stood there for a long time, the clipboard heavy in my hands. The passengers waited silently. Their faces turned toward me with an expression I finally recognized. Hope. They weren't angry or vengeful. They were just tired. They wanted to go home. They wanted the shift to end. And the only way that could happen was if someone finished what they'd started. I looked at Supervisor Kang. There's another option, isn't there? There has to be. She hesitated, then nodded slowly. The signal that failed in 1994. It was never properly repaired. They replaced it, but they didn't address the root cause. The wiring was substandard, installed during the initial construction to save costs. If you file a proper report now, if you document the fault and require a full system replacement, then technically the inspection is complete. Not the one from 1994, but the one that should have happened afterward, the one that would have prevented any future accidents. I pulled out my tablet and opened a new inspection report. My hands were shaking, but I managed to type clearly. Signal malfunction at KM 47.3, line 2 eastbound. Wiring fault dating to original construction. Requires immediate replacement and full system audit. Risk level, critical. I attached the photo of the unmarked service door, the image of the cycling relay switch, and a note about the 1994 accident. Then I signed it. Inspector Oh Min Seo, Seoul Metro Maintenance Division. I submitted the report to the control center, watching as the upload bar crept across the screen, praying that it would go through despite the dead mobile signal. The screen blinked. Report received. Work order generated. Priority urgent. The moment the confirmation appeared, the pale light from the service door began to dim. The passengers turned toward it, their expressions shifting from hope to something like relief. One by one, they stepped through the doorway, not into light, but into darkness, and as they passed through, they faded, becoming translucent and then invisible. The driver was the last to go. He stopped at the threshold and looked back at me one final time. "Thank you," he said simply. Then he stepped through, and the door closed behind him with a soft click. The train was still there, sitting on the tracks, but it was different now. Older, more decayed, as if 30 years of waiting had finally caught up with it. The lights inside the cars had gone dark, and the windows were covered in dust. I walked up to the driver's cabin and peered inside. The controls were rusted, the seat torn, and on the dashboard was a small plastic nameplate. Driver Kim Tae-hyun, 1993-1994. I took a photo of it, then backed away slowly. Supervisor Kang was still standing at the end of the tunnel, watching me. "You did well," she said. "The report will force a full inspection. They'll find the wiring faults throughout this section. It'll take months to repair, but it'll be done properly this time." "What about you?" I asked. "You said you've been trying to fix this. Does this mean you can leave too?" She smiled faintly. "I was never trapped like they were. I just stayed because I felt responsible. But yes, I think I can leave now." She turned to go, then paused. "One more thing. Check your personnel file when you get back to the office. There was a clerical error when you were hired. Your name was entered incorrectly in the system. It's been Oh Min Seok in the database for 6 years. Tonight's report corrected it." I pulled out my employee ID card and looked at it. The name printed there read, Oh Min Seok. I'd never noticed. I'd carried this card every day for 6 years, swiped it through readers, showed it to security guards, and I'd never seen that the name was wrong. Or maybe it had been right, and I'd been wrong, living under a name that wasn't quite mine, filling a space that had been waiting since 1994. I climbed back up to street level just as dawn was breaking over Seoul, the sky turning from black to deep blue. The city was waking up, early commuters heading to the station, delivery trucks rumbling past, the smell of coffee and bread from a nearby bakery. I checked my phone and saw a dozen messages from the control center. Urgent inquiries about my report, requests for clarification, notifications that the entire section of Line 2 between Sindang and Cheonggu was being shut down for emergency inspection. I replied briefly, confirming the details, then walked to the nearest subway entrance and descended back underground. The first train of the morning was just pulling into the station, crowded with passengers heading to work. I watched them board, watched the doors close, watched the train pull away smoothly and disappear into the tunnel. Everything looked normal. Everything looked safe. But I knew now that beneath the surface of the system, beneath the schedules and rosters and computerized tracking, there were gaps, spaces where people fell through, names that got changed or forgotten, shifts that never ended because no one signed off on the report. I took the next train home, standing near the window, watching the tunnel lights flash past. At one point, we passed through the section near KM 47.3, and I looked for the service door, but the wall was smooth and unbroken, as if the door had never existed. Maybe it hadn't. Maybe it only appeared when someone was needed to close a loop that had been left open. I thought about the 12 people who'd finally been able to leave, about the driver who'd been trying to complete his route for 30 years, about Supervisor Kang, who'd stayed out of guilt, and I thought about Oh Min Seok, the man whose name I'd been carrying, whose shift I'd been filling, who might have been me in another timeline where I'd been born a few years earlier or spelled my name with one different syllable. I kept the newspaper from 1994, stored carefully in a plastic sleeve in my apartment. Sometimes I take it out and read the article again, looking at the list of names, making sure I remember them. And I keep checking my employee ID, watching to make sure my name stays correct, stays mine. Oh Min Seo, 2 syllables, distinct and unambiguous. Because I learned that night that names matter more than we think, that a single character difference can mean the space between living your own life and living someone else's, that schedules and rosters and systems have a way of filling gaps, whether we volunteer for them or not. The signal at KM 47.3 was replaced 2 months later, along with all the wiring in that section. The work took 16 weeks and cost the city millions of won. But there have been no signal malfunctions since then. No unexplained red lights, no phantom trains. The unmarked service door never reappeared on any inspection. And when I filed a follow-up inquiry with the Historical Records Division, they told me there was no evidence of any additional access point at that location. The old train I'd seen that night was never found. No abandoned cars, no rusted hulks in forgotten maintenance yards. It was as if it had dissolved back into history, its purpose fulfilled. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm running inspections in the deep tunnels, I hear something that makes me stop and listen. The distant echo of wheels on rails, the faint hiss of pneumatic doors, the sound of passengers boarding and departing. I know it's probably just the normal operations of the subway, sounds carrying through the complex network of tunnels, bouncing off concrete walls and metal rails. But I also know that there are lines in this city that run deeper than the official maps show, schedules that continue long after the last train has returned to the depot, shifts that someone, somewhere, is still working because the report was never signed and the inspection was never complete. I carry my inspection kit with me always now. Flashlight, track gauge, emergency radio, and a clipboard with blank report forms, just in case I ever encounter another loop that needs closing, another roster that needs correcting, Another name that's been waiting 30 years to be properly recorded. Because that's what we do. Those of us who work in the deep places of the city, in the tunnels and shafts and forgotten corridors where the infrastructure meets the invisible. We keep the schedules. We maintain the systems. We make sure the trains run on time. And when something goes wrong, when someone falls through the cracks, we're the ones who have to go back and fix it, even if it means descending into darkness and confronting the ghosts of accidents that should have been prevented, that could have been avoided, that live on in the system's memory long after the official records have been filed away and forgotten. My name is Omin Seo. 2 syllables, track maintenance inspector for Seoul Metro Line 2. I finish my shifts. I sign my reports. And I make sure that when I leave the tunnels each morning, I'm still carrying the same name I came in with, because I know now how easy it is to lose yourself in the underground, to become part of the infrastructure, to fade into a roster where you're just a letter, just a placeholder, just a space that needs to be filled. I won't let that happen. Not to me, not to anyone else who works these lines. The loop is closed. The train has stopped running. And the names on the report are correct. All 12 of them, properly recorded, properly honored, finally at rest. Across these stories, we've seen different places where Korea's past refused to stay buried. A hospital that remembered names too well. A harbor that wouldn't let its flame die. A classroom that kept its colors wet. A subway line that kept its schedule running 30 years past its deadline. Each of them had one thing in common, something unfinished, a duty unfulfilled, a record left unsigned, a light left burning for someone who never came home. In Korean culture, there's a word for that kind of lingering weight. It's called han. A quiet ache that comes from things left unresolved, from grief that doesn't know where to go, from promises that history forgot to keep. But han isn't just a ghost story word. It's what we all carry, in small ways. The messages we never sent, the apologies we rehearsed but never said, the work we left half done thinking we'd finish it tomorrow. The truth is, unfinished things don't just vanish. They wait, in systems, in places, in names, until someone picks them up again. Maybe that's what these stories really are. Reminders that not every haunting needs an exorcism. Some only need completion. To file the report, to relight the lamp, to finish the portrait, to remember the names properly, so the world stops confusing who was lost with who's still here. So if there's something in your life that's been sitting unfinished, something that hums quietly in the background, asking to be seen, don't ignore it. Finish it. Because what we leave undone doesn't disappear. It waits for the next person with a name close enough to ours to take its place. Finish what you start. Say what you need to say. And when you walk out of the places that feel a little too still, whether it's a clinic corridor, a pier, a classroom, or a subway tunnel, make sure you're still carrying the same name you came in with. Thank you for listening tonight. Take care of yourselves and of each other. Remember the names that mattered, keep the lights tended, and don't let unfinished things call your name in the dark. I'll see you in the next one.